On the 15th of August, 2008, the sun was shining brightly over the quiet countryside as preparations were in full swing for what was to be the most anticipated wedding of the year. Laura Jennings, a 27-year-old elementary school teacher, was about to marry Timothy Hayes, a kind-hearted man she had met in college. Their relationship had blossomed over the years, a perfect mix of friendship, passion, and love. It had been a whirlwind romance, but one that seemed destined to last forever. Laura had always dreamed of this day, the day she would marry her soulmate, and her dream was finally coming true. The venue was a picturesque estate nestled on the outskirts of the small town they both called home. The sprawling lawn was adorned with white tents, flowers, and ribbons. The air was filled with the hum of excited chatter as guests arrived, each one smiling, anticipating the beautiful ceremony that would soon take place. Family and friends were all present, eagerly awaiting Laura and Timothy's vows. But in the moments leading up to the ceremony, something unimaginable happened. In the bridal suite, Laura stood before the full-length mirror, her hands gently smoothing down the fabric of her wedding gown. The dress, an elegant creation of lace and satin, clung to her frame perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. Her heart raced with excitement, her thoughts drifting between anticipation for the ceremony and nervousness about the future. It was everything she had hoped for, the culmination of years of dreaming, planning, and love. Laura's reflection in the mirror looked back at her, her eyes shining with a mix of joy and emotion. She could hardly believe it was finally happening. Her childhood dreams were becoming a reality, and she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Her hand brushed through her hair, which had been styled just so, and a soft smile played on her lips. Her mother had always told her that the wedding day was the happiest of a woman's life, and as Laura stood there in that moment, she truly understood why. But as Laura stood alone in the room, savoring the silence and the quiet thrill of what was to come, there was a knock on the door. It was Timothy. His voice echoed through the door, playful yet filled with sincerity. "Laura, are you ready? I can't wait to see you." Laura's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him all day, and she could hardly wait to see her soon-to-be husband in his tuxedo. The thought of walking down the aisle to him, pledging her love and devotion, sent a thrill through her entire being. She had dreamed of this moment for so long. "I'm almost ready," she called back, a laugh escaping her lips. "Just one more minute." Timothy's voice came again, this time softer, more tender. "I love you, Laura. I always have. And I always will." Laura's heart fluttered in her chest as she took in his words. She replied quietly, her voice full of emotion. "I love you too, Tim, more than you know. I can't wait for our lives to begin." There was a brief silence, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. The connection between them, even through the door, was palpable, and Laura allowed herself to feel the depth of that love. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart. Everything was about to change, but she felt ready. The minutes passed slowly as she gave herself a final once-over in the mirror, adjusting her veil, smoothing the fabric of her gown once more. She knew she had to leave soon to join the ceremony, but part of her wanted to savor this moment, this stillness, before the whirlwind of the day took over. When Laura opened the door, Timothy was standing there, his face full of awe and admiration. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, and for a split second she saw a flash of disbelief in his eyes. She was stunning. He reached out and gently took her hands in his, pulling her close. "You're perfect," he whispered, his voice shaky with emotion. "You are everything I've ever wanted." Laura smiled up at him, feeling an overwhelming wave of love wash over her. She reached up, her hand resting against his cheek, tracing the lines of his face as she gazed at him. In this moment, everything was perfect. Nothing could ruin this day. She believed it wholeheartedly. "I can't wait for the world to see us together," Laura whispered back. But just as they shared a final lingering kiss, the moment was interrupted by the sound of someone rushing into the room. It was Emily, Laura's older sister, her face pale with worry. "Laura, it's time," Emily said, her voice tight with nervous excitement. "The guests are all waiting." Laura nodded, squeezing Timothy's hand one last time before she stepped away. As Emily helped her adjust the last few details of her gown, she smiled, looking over at her sister. "I'll be right back. Just need a second." But as she stepped toward the door, her last words were filled with a mixture of calm and certainty. "I'm ready. I'll be down in just a minute." Enterprising. Little did she know, those words would be the last anyone would hear from her. As Laura descended the stairs to make her way to the ceremony, Emily glanced back toward the dressing room. But when she turned back to see her sister, there was no sign of Laura. No one saw her walk down the aisle. The guests, eagerly waiting, became restless. There were whispers, murmurs of confusion, but no one could have predicted what would unfold next. Laura Jennings had vanished. Without a trace, without a single clue to explain her disappearance. Building the mystery. Days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. But still, there was no sign of Laura. The town, which had once been filled with the sounds of laughter and excitement in anticipation of a wedding, now carried an eerie silence. What had happened to the bride who had never arrived? Timothy, who had been the first to raise the alarm when Laura didn't appear at the ceremony, was devastated. His world had shattered the moment he realized she was truly gone. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, despair, and unanswered questions. Timothy worked tirelessly with the police, trying to piece together the events leading up to Laura's disappearance. He walked the grounds of the estate, retracing her every step, but there was no sign of her. The wedding dress, which should have been a symbol of their love, was never worn. The ceremony, which had been meticulously planned, never took place. For Emily, the pain was even more unbearable. She couldn't believe that her sister, the woman she had grown up with, could simply disappear. Laura had been a rock for Emily, always the one to offer support and love when times were tough. The thought that her sister was gone, perhaps forever, was almost too much to bear. Emily's mind would often race, replaying every moment, every conversation, every glance from that fateful day, but nothing seemed to make sense. She couldn't stop thinking about the last words her sister had said, "I'm ready, I'll be down in just a minute." Those words echoed in her mind constantly, each time bringing more pain and confusion. Months passed without a breakthrough. The police had no new leads, no clues that pointed to where Laura might have gone or who could have taken her. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence to suggest anything other than the fact that she had simply vanished. Timothy and Emily clung to the hope that one day she would return, but as the months turned into years, that hope began to fade. The investigation slowed, and eventually it seemed as though the case was just another unsolved mystery, relegated to the past. In the quiet of her home, Emily found herself lost in thought, obsessively trying to find answers where none seemed to exist. She would spend hours poring over the photographs from the wedding, staring at the images of her sister in her wedding dress, smiling full of life, surrounded by friends and family. In those pictures Laura was still there, still present, as though she had never disappeared at all. But the questions lingered. What had happened to Laura? Why hadn't anyone seen anything? Where had she gone, and who would want to take her from the life she had so carefully built? Emily couldn't let go of the thought that something, somewhere, was being hidden from her. The more time passed, the more desperate she became for answers. There were times when she felt as though she was chasing a shadow, grasping at fragments of memories that didn't add up, trying to make sense of a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. Every anniversary of Laura's disappearance brought renewed grief. The pain of the unknown gnawed at Emily's insides, and Timothy was no better off. He had become a shell of the man he once was, consumed by guilt and regret, wondering if there had been something he could have done differently, something he could have said to keep her safe. He continued to hold on to the belief that Laura would return, but even his unwavering faith began to falter. 1 year turned into 2, and then 3. The case went cold. The media attention faded. The flowers from the wedding day eventually wilted, and the estate, once alive with the buzz of celebration, was now a sad reminder of a day that never came to pass. But in the hearts of those who loved Laura, the memory of her was very much alive. She had been a beautiful soul, someone who had touched the lives of everyone around her. To those who knew her, the thought that she could be gone forever was too much to bear. But Emily never stopped searching. Despite the years that had passed, despite the pressure to move on, she continued to follow up on any lead, no matter how small. She sent countless letters to the police, attended meetings with private investigators, and even reached out to other families of missing persons, hoping that one day someone would have the answers she so desperately needed. But as the years wore on, she felt increasingly isolated, as though the rest of the world had forgotten about her sister. Time, however, has a way of bringing things to light, even when it seems like all hope is lost. What no one knew at the time was that Emily's perseverance would soon pay off in a way she could never have anticipated. The world may have moved on, but Emily's determination would soon lead to a discovery that would change everything. The answers to the questions that had haunted her for so long were closer than she could ever have imagined. But until then, the pain of Laura's disappearance remained, an open wound in the hearts of those who had loved her, and with each passing year that wound only deepened. The first glimpse of hope. 5 years had passed since Laura Jennings vanished without a trace, and though the case had grown cold, Emily's relentless pursuit for answers never wavered. She had come to terms with the reality that the police were no longer actively investigating her sister's disappearance. The trail had gone cold, the search parties had disbanded, and the local media had moved on to the next story. But Emily couldn't let go. It was in the midst of her growing frustration that something strange happened, something no one could have predicted. It was an ordinary afternoon in late spring when Emily received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words would change everything. "Is this Emily Jennings?" the voice asked. "Yes, this is Emily," she replied, her heart beginning to race. "Who's calling?" "My name is Claire. I'm the caretaker for the old Jennings estate. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you need to come here. There's something you need to see." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The Jennings estate had been sold shortly after Laura's disappearance. The new owners had made some renovations, but the property was mostly abandoned. Emily hadn't been there in years, and the idea that something might have been found on the property sent a chill down her spine. "I'll be there in an hour," Emily said, barely able to control the trembling in her voice. "What's going on?" I don't know." Claire's voice quivered. "But I found something, and I think you'll want to see it." The moment Emily hung up the phone, her mind was flooded with 100 questions. What could she have possibly found? Was it something related to Laura? Had there been a clue all this time, hidden from view? Or was this another wild goose chase, one more dead end? When she arrived at the estate, the familiar house loomed before her, its once pristine exterior now showing signs of wear and age. The front yard, which had once been filled with flowers and carefully trimmed hedges, was now overgrown and unkempt. But as Emily made her way toward the house, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope stirring within her chest. Something was waiting for her here, something she wasn't prepared for. Inside, Claire led her to the back of the house, where an old rusted shed stood in the corner of the yard. It was a place that had been largely ignored during the renovations, a forgotten relic of the past. Emily had always thought it looked out of place, but never thought much of it. Now she could see that it was far more significant than she could have imagined. Claire pushed open the creaking door, revealing a dark, musty interior. She stepped inside, and Emily followed closely behind. There, lying in the corner, was a large, old duffel bag, covered in dust and cobwebs. At first, Emily thought nothing of it, but Claire's next words made her freeze in place. "I found this bag behind the shed," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been there for years, hidden away. But when I opened it, I found something that might be important, something that might belong to Laura." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She stepped forward, her mind racing with possibilities. Could it really be something that belonged to her sister? Could this be the breakthrough she had been hoping for all these years? With trembling hands, she opened the bag, and there, folded carefully inside, was a wedding dress. Her wedding dress. The very dress Laura had been wearing when she vanished. The dress that had never been worn at the ceremony. The dress that had, until now, been presumed lost forever. But there it was, perfectly intact, as if it had been waiting all this time to be found. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she reached out to touch the fabric. The soft, delicate lace felt eerily familiar, as if it had been waiting for her touch. But as she ran her fingers over the material, something caught her attention. There was something else inside the dress. With a sinking heart, Emily carefully unfolded the layers of the dress, revealing a small object wedged in the folds of the fabric. It was a photograph, yellowed with age, but unmistakable in its clarity. It was a photo of Laura, taken on the day of her wedding, but there was something off about the image. Laura was standing in the garden, smiling as she held the bouquet, but her azure eyes were not the same. There was a distant, almost vacant expression in them, as if she were somewhere else entirely, not really present in that moment. The photograph fell from Emily's hands, landing softly on the floor. Her mind spun, trying to make sense of the discovery, but the pieces didn't fit. Why would Laura's dress be hidden in a shed for all these years? Why would someone keep it? And who had placed it there? For a moment, Emily stood frozen in place, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Then, the questions began to flood her mind. Could this be the key to understanding what had happened to Laura? Could this dress, this photograph, be the first real clue in over 5 years? Emily wasn't sure, but one thing was certain: her sister's disappearance was far from over, and she would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Taking action. The discovery of Laura's wedding dress and the unsettling photograph sent a ripple of shock through Emily. After 5 years of fruitless searching, the fragile thread of hope that had been fraying in her heart suddenly tightened. This was no longer just about finding a missing person, it was about uncovering a truth that had been buried for far too long. Emily knew that she couldn't rest until she understood what had happened to her sister. The first thing she did was reach out to Timothy. For years, they had both lived in the shadow of Laura's disappearance, each dealing with the loss in their own way. Emily had been the one who never gave up, constantly following every lead and every small piece of evidence, even when the rest of the world had moved on. Timothy, on the other hand, had withdrawn, consumed by guilt and uncertainty. But now, with this discovery, Emily needed him more than ever. Timothy's response was immediate. He hadn't seen the dress or the photograph, but he could sense the urgency in Emily's voice. They agreed to meet the following day at the estate where Emily had found the dress and begin to investigate the shed and its contents more thoroughly. When Emily arrived at the estate the next morning, Timothy was already there, his expression clouded with concern. As they walked back to the shed together, the weight of the situation settled over them like a heavy fog. Every step felt like a reminder of how much time had passed, and how much had been lost in the years since Laura vanished. "We need to find out who did this," Emily said quietly as they approached the shed. "Why would someone keep her wedding dress? Why would they hide it here, of all places?" Timothy nodded, his face hard with determination. "I don't know, but we need to find out. If Laura's dress was hidden, it means someone wanted to keep it from being found. Someone wanted to hide something." Inside the shed, they meticulously combed through every corner, every pile of forgotten belongings. Nothing stood out at first, but as they searched, Emily's eyes were drawn to an old, dust-covered filing cabinet in the corner. It had been overlooked during the renovations, left untouched and ignored. She pulled open the drawer, her heart racing as she sifted through the yellowed papers inside. Then she found something, a series of photographs that made her blood run cold. They were images of Laura, but not the kind she had seen before. These weren't the pictures from the wedding day. These were taken long before that day, and they showed Laura in different places, with different Pio Planon of whom Emily recognized. In some of the photos, Laura appeared to be with a man, someone she had never mentioned, someone who didn't seem familiar to Emily at all. "Tim," Emily called out, her voice trembling, "you need to see this." Timothy came over quickly, his face pale as he scanned the photographs. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing to a photo of Laura with a man whose face was partially obscured. He was tall, with dark hair and a serious expression, someone Emily couldn't place. "I have no idea," Emily replied, feeling a sense of dread creeping over her. "But these photos, they were taken before the wedding, before she disappeared. Why would they be hidden here, with her dress?" Timothy shook his head, his jaw tightening. I don't know, but we need to find out who this man is. He might be the key to understanding what happened to Laura. The next step was clear. Emily and Timothy needed to track down the man in the photographs. But who was he? And why had he been with Laura in the months leading up to her disappearance? The police had never mentioned any significant leads involving other individuals, and Emily had never heard her sister speak of a mysterious man before. As they sat in the shed, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been interrupted, the weight of the situation hit them both. This wasn't just about solving a case. This was about confronting a painful truth that had been hidden for far too long. Emily immediately began searching for any information on the man. She reached out to her contacts in the local area, asking if anyone recognized the face in the photograph. She scoured social media looking for any connections, but found nothing. Days turned into weeks, and it seemed like they were getting nowhere. But then, Emily received an unexpected lead. A former coworker of Laura's contacted her, recalling that Laura had mentioned someone named Mark Thompson in passing a few months before her wedding. Mark had been a former friend from college, someone Laura had known long before she met Timothy. According to the coworker, Laura had confided in her that Mark had recently come back into her life, and they had been spending more time together. This was the first real clue they had. Emily's heart pounded as she learned more about Mark Thompson. He had been a close friend to Laura during her college years, but their friendship had faded after Laura and Timothy started dating. Yet, for some unknown reason, he had reappeared in her life shortly before the wedding. Emily wondered, was he just an old friend? Or was there more to the story? Was it possible that Mark had something to do with Laura's disappearance? Determined to get answers, Emily and Timothy set out to find Mark. They tracked him down to a small apartment on the outskirts of town. As they stood outside the building, Emily felt a knot in her stomach. She had no idea what to expect. Was Mark just an innocent bystander in this strange mystery, or was he involved in something darker? They knocked on the door, and after a moment of hesitation, Mark answered. He was in his mid-30s now, his face older and wearier than in the photographs, but there was something about his expression that made Emily uneasy. He seemed startled, almost guilty when he saw them standing there. "Can I help you?" Mark asked, his voice defensive. "We need to talk," Emily said firmly, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside her. "We're trying to find out what happened to Laura." End of chat. Mark's eyes flickered with a brief flash of fear before he quickly masked it with indifference. "I don't know anything about that," he said, his tone too casual. "I haven't seen Laura in years." But Emily wasn't convinced. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. The answers they were looking for were close, and she could sense that Mark knew more than he was letting on. A perfect stranger. After their tense encounter with Mark Thompson, Emily and Timothy were left with more questions than answers. Mark had denied knowing anything about Laura's disappearance, but there was an unsettling feeling in the pit of Emily's stomach that told her his story didn't add up. She could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he spoke. It was subtle, but it was there, and it made her wonder. Was Mark involved? Or was there someone else pulling the strings, someone far more dangerous? It was at this point, when Emily felt the walls closing in on her, that a new figure entered the picture, a man named David Winters. David was everything Emily and Timothy needed at that moment. Someone who seemed to have the answers, someone who had connections and the resources to dig deeper into the mystery. He was a private investigator, highly recommended by a trusted friend of Timothy's family, someone who claimed to have experience with missing persons cases. David was charming, composed, and professional. From the moment they met, he seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He reassured Emily and Timothy that he would do everything in his power to uncover the truth about Laura's disappearance. "I've worked on cases like this before," David said as they sat down to discuss the details. "I know how to track down the missing pieces, how to follow the leads that others might overlook. You've been through so much already. Let me help." David's words were like a balm to Emily's weary soul. Finally, someone who seemed to genuinely care. Someone who wasn't simply going through the motions. She felt a sense of relief as he outlined his plan to investigate Mark Thompson and other potential leads. He even offered to help them reach out to the police, who had long since stopped actively pursuing the case. The next few weeks passed, with David working tirelessly on the investigation. He made phone calls, pulled records, and even visited some of Laura's old friends from college. Each time Emily and Timothy met with him, he had new information details about Mark's whereabouts, potential connections to other people in Laura's life, and even some strange inconsistencies in the timeline leading up to her disappearance. It felt as though they were finally making progress, and Emily couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. But as the days turned into weeks, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything specific at first, just a nagging feeling that Emily couldn't shake. She started to notice that David seemed a little too eager, a little too perfect. He was always available when they needed him, always had the right answers, and always knew just what to say. One night, as Emily reviewed the case files at home, she stumbled upon something that made her pause. It was a small detail in one of David's reports, an odd reference to a meeting that had supposedly taken place between him and one of Laura's old professors. But Emily knew for a fact that Laura had never mentioned this professor. In fact, she couldn't recall a single instance when Laura had even spoken about him. Her curiosity piqued, Emily decided to confront David. The next time they met, she asked about the professor. David's reaction was swift, too swift. He brushed it off, claiming that it was just a mistake in the report, a mix-up in names. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made Emily's heart race with suspicion. As the investigation continued, Emily's doubts grew. David's behavior became increasingly strange. He started to insert himself into every aspect of the case-making phone calls without consulting her, showing up uninvited at locations and offering unsolicited advice on how to handle certain people. He was always there, lurking in the background, ensuring that everything was going according to his plan. One evening, as Emily sat in the living room, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. David had left his laptop unattended, and it was open to a folder labeled Jennings. Unable to resist, Emily clicked on it, hoping to find something that might help her understand why David was acting the way he was. But what she found wasn't what she expected. The folder was filled with files, but none of them seemed to be related to the investigation. Instead, there were files of photographs of her, Timothy, and even Mark Thompson. They were candid shots taken from a distance, like someone had been following them. The realization hit Emily like a punch to the gut. David had been watching them. Watching her. She scrolled through the images, her fingers trembling as she clicked on one of the photographs. It was a picture of her and Timothy at a cafe, laughing together, taken just days before they had met David. There were dozens of similar photos, each one showing them in various places around town, always with someone watching from afar. Emily's heart raced as she shut the laptop, her mind spinning. Had David been following them all along? Was he truly trying to help, or was there something more sinister going on? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being manipulated, controlled by someone who had an agenda far different from their own. The next day, Emily confronted David. She asked him about the photographs, about the files, and about his sudden, overwhelming interest in the case. David's response was cold, calculated. He claimed that he had only been trying to help, that the photographs were part of his research into their lives, but Emily wasn't buying it. "You've been following us," she said, her voice steady but full of fury. "Why? What do you want from us?" David's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something anger, perhaps behind his eyes. "I'm just doing my job," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "But if you don't trust me anymore, then I suggest you find someone else to help you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing in the middle of the room, her mind racing with questions. She knew one thing for certain now. David wasn't the savior he had made himself out to be. There was something darker at play, something hidden beneath the surface that she had yet to uncover. Rising tension and threats. The feeling of being watched never quite left Emily after her confrontation with David Winters. There was an eerie sense of unease that settled over her, as if the walls were closing in. What had started as a simple search for answers into her sister's disappearance had now become something much darker, something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. Emily knew that someone had been keeping a close eye on her, and Timothy someone who knew far too much about their every move. For the first time since the investigation began, Emily began to fear for her safety. She couldn't shake the thought that David's perfect facade was just a mask to hide something far more sinister. What if he wasn't just trying to solve Laura's case? What if he had something to do with her disappearance? And who else could be involved in the web of deceit and manipulation? It wasn't long before the tension took a terrifying turn. One evening, as Emily sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the notes she had gathered over the past few weeks, a strange knock echoed through her front door. It was far later than anyone she knew would be coming by. Her heart skipped a beat as she slowly walked to the door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. At first, Emily thought it might have been a mistake, a passerby knocking out of habit. But then her eyes caught sight of something that made her stomach drop, a small, folded piece of paper resting on the doorstep. Without thinking, she reached down and picked it up, unfolding the note with trembling hands. The message was simple, written in block letters. "Stay away from David. You're in danger. I know what you're looking for." The words sent a chill down her spine. Who had left this? And how did they know about David? Emily's first instinct was to call Timothy, but she stopped herself. She couldn't involve him yet, not until she knew who was behind this warning. She needed more information, something concrete that would tell her who was pulling the strings. The next day, Emily decided to follow her instincts and investigate further. She retraced her steps, trying to think of any possible clues she may have missed. It didn't take long before she stumbled upon something unexpected. As she walked to her car parked in the driveway, Emily noticed something out of place. Small black camera tucked in the bushes near her front porch. It was discreet, easily overlooked, but there it was, almost like it had been placed deliberately for her to find. Her heart raced as she pulled the camera from its hiding place. It was small, a hidden surveillance device designed to monitor the area. It was then that it hit her. She had been under surveillance for weeks, maybe even longer. Someone had been watching her every move, gathering information about her investigation into Laura's disappearance. Emily's mind whirled with possibilities. Was David involved in this? Had he been watching her the entire time? Or was there someone else who was determined to stop her from getting too close to the truth? With the camera in hand, Emily immediately went to the police. It was the first real piece of evidence she had, something she could show to authorities. But when she arrived at the station and presented her findings, the response was far from what she expected. The officer who took her statement, a man named Detective Robert Hall, seemed unnervingly disinterested. He glanced at the camera for a brief moment before shrugging. "We've seen things like this before," he muttered, tossing the camera aside. "It's probably just a prank. Nothing to worry about." Emily's frustration bubbled to the surface. This was the one lead that might explain why she was being followed, why her life had been turned upside down, and the police were dismissing it like it was nothing. "This isn't a prank," Emily insisted, her voice shaking. "Someone is watching me. Someone knows what I'm doing. They want me to stop looking for my sister." Detective Hall raised an eyebrow, but didn't offer any further help. "We'll look into it, but there's not much we can do without more evidence. You should just focus on the investigation and leave the rest to us." But Emily wasn't going to stop. She couldn't. The danger was too real, and she was getting too close to uncovering the truth. She had to keep pushing forward, even if it meant facing more threats, more danger. Later that day, Emily returned to her apartment, still rattled by the police's indifference. She knew she couldn't rely on them to help her now. She had to take matters into her own hands. It was time to confront David Winters once and for all. Emily reached out to Timothy, asking him to meet her at the apartment. She needed his support, but she also needed to make sure he was aware of the growing danger. When Timothy arrived, she told him everything: the camera, the threats, the strange behavior from David. "We need to find out what David is hiding," Emily said, her voice trembling. "He's been lying to us from the start. I know it." Timothy looked hesitant, clearly torn. He had trusted David, believed that he was trying to help them find Laura. But now, with everything Emily had uncovered, it was hard to ignore the growing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Timothy admitted, his voice low. "But if what you're saying is true, we have to stop him before he does something worse." With their resolve firm, Emily and Timothy devised a plan to confront David and get the answers they needed. But as they prepared for the showdown, the danger only escalated. They were no longer dealing with a simple missing persons case. They were in the midst of something far more sinister, something that involved manipulation, lies, and hidden truths that no one was prepared for. As Emily and Timothy set their plan in motion, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone was waiting for them to make the wrong move. The stakes were higher than ever, and the closer they got to the truth, the more desperate the people involved became to stop them. The breaking point. The days leading up to their confrontation with David Winters felt like an endless waiting game. Emily and Timothy had gathered everything they could, piecing together the fragments of their investigation, but something in the air told them that the truth was dangerously close. Too close. The closer they got to uncovering the secrets, the more threatening their surroundings became. Their every move felt scrutinized, as if they were being pushed toward an inescapable trap. Emily could no longer sit idle. She had to confront David head-on, confront whatever dark truth he was hiding. Timothy, still uncertain about their next steps, finally agreed to stand by her side. They needed answers. And they needed them now. The meeting was set for the evening at a quiet cafe that David had suggested. It was an unassuming location, dimly lit, tucked away from the busy streets, but there was something about the place that felt wrong. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of David's plan. But no matter how much doubt gnawed at her, she couldn't back down now. They arrived at the cafe and found a corner booth, just as David had instructed. When he entered a few moments later, his expression seemed strangely calm, almost too calm. He was dressed in the same professional attire, his movements fluid and controlled. But there was a darkness lurking behind his smile, something that Emily could sense even from across the table. "Emily, Timothy," David greeted them, sitting down as if they were just old friends catching up. "I'm glad you could make it." Emily wasted no time. She didn't want to play games anymore. "David," she began, her voice steady, "we know you're lying. We know you've been watching us, following us, and now we know you've been hiding things from us, things about Laura." David's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he quickly masked it. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice still smooth, but the tension in his posture was evident. "You've been involved in Laura's disappearance from the very beginning," Emily said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The dress, the photographs, the surveillance, it was all you. You've been manipulating us. But why? What do you want from us?" For a long moment David didn't respond. He just sat there, studying them with cold eyes, as if weighing his next move. Finally, he exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. "I wanted to help you," he said softly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "But it's clear now that you've figured it out. All the pieces are in place, aren't they?" Emily's heart pounded as she realized that this wasn't just a confrontation. This was the moment where everything was about to come crashing down. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Why did you do it? Why did you take Laura?" David's smile faltered for just a moment, but then it returned, colder and more calculating. "You still don't understand," he said, his voice hard. "You think this is about your sister, but it's not. It was never about her. It was about you, Emily." A chill ran down Emily's spine as she processed his words. "Me?" she whispered. "Yes," David said, his gaze fixed on her. "You're the one I've been watching all along. I've been watching you, Emily. I've been waiting for you to figure it out." Before Emily could respond, David stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward in the process. His expression had changed, no longer calm and composed, but twisted with something darker, something dangerous. "I never intended for things to go this far," David said, his voice rising. "But you pushed me to this. You kept getting too close, asking too many questions. You should have let me handle it from the beginning." Timothy jumped to his feet. his fists clenched in anger. "You're a monster," he spat. "You've been playing us from the start. What the hell do you want from us?" David's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. "What I want is control. I wanted to keep you both away from the truth. I didn't want anyone to uncover what really happened to Laura, because if they did, everything I've worked for would be exposed." Emily's mind raced as she tried to piece together what he was saying. "What did you do to her?" she asked, her voice breaking through the tension. David's lips curled into a sinister smile. "I didn't do anything to Laura. Not directly. She was never meant to disappear. But when she started getting too close, when she started asking too many questions, I had to make sure she stayed quiet. I had to keep her out of the picture." A horrific realization hit Emily. "You didn't kill her," she whispered, "but you." David's laugh was short and bitter. "I didn't need to kill her. I just needed her to stay quiet. I needed her out of the way so that I could have what I wanted. I needed you to stay focused on the case, keep you distracted so I could keep moving forward." Timothy took a step forward, ready to fight, but Emily held him back. "What do you mean, keep moving forward?" she demanded. David paused, then stepped closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "Because Laura wasn't the only one who knew. You knew too, didn't you? You were the key to everything. And I couldn't afford to let you find the truth, not until it was too late." With a sudden, violent movement, David lunged at them, knocking the table over in the process. But before he could reach them, a loud crash echoed through the cafe as the door slammed open. 2 uniformed officers burst in, weapons drawn. "Hands in the air!" one of the officers shouted. "Move away from him!" David froze, his hands instinctively raised. Emily felt a rush of relief flood through her as the officers moved in quickly, apprehending David. But she wasn't finished. She needed to know everything, and she would stop at nothing to uncover the full truth. As David was led out of the cafe in handcuffs, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with venom. "You'll never know the full story," he hissed. "There are things you can't undo, things you'll never understand." But Emily was undeterred. She had already uncovered the most important part, the truth about David, about Laura, and about the dark web of lies he had woven around them. The toll of the truth. The days that followed David's arrest were a blur. The shock of what had transpired in the cafe, the revelation of David's true motives, his dark obsession, and the web of lies he had spun left Emily and Timothy reeling. The investigation was officially over, and David was behind bars, but the emotional toll was far from finished. Emily felt a deep sense of relief as she watched David being led away by the police. But that relief was tempered by an overwhelming grief that weighed heavily on her chest. The answers she had longed for had finally been given, but they came at a cost. The truth had shattered everything she thought she knew about her sister, about herself, and about the people she had trusted. The truth had come with a darkness that she hadn't been prepared for. Timothy, too, was deeply affected. The man he had trusted, the investigator who had seemed so dedicated to finding his fiancée, had turned out to be the one who had been orchestrating the entire nightmare. It felt like a betrayal on a scale he could hardly comprehend. How could someone who seemed so perfect, so trustworthy, turn out to be the villain in their story? How could he have been so blind? The police continued their investigation into David, uncovering more disturbing details about his life and his twisted fixation on Emily. It turned out that David had been involved in several similar cases, using his position as a private investigator to manipulate families and control the outcomes of their searches for loved ones. He had a long history of playing both sides, pretending to help while secretly driving them further into despair. But it wasn't until Laura's case that his control had slipped, that his obsession had begun to unravel. For Emily, the hardest part was the knowledge that Laura had been the one to uncover the truth first, only to be silenced. The fact that her sister had been a part of this twisted game, even unknowingly, was a painful realization. Laura had been the one who had first been drawn into David's web, and though she had tried to escape, she had been too late. She had paid the price for her curiosity, for asking the wrong questions, for seeking the truth. As Emily sat alone in her apartment that night, staring out the window into the darkness, she thought about her sister. She thought about the woman who had been full of hope and excitement, the woman who had dreamt of her wedding day, only to disappear in the blink of an eye. Emily realized that, in a way, Laura's disappearance had been a form of protection. She had been spared from the horror of knowing what had really been going on behind the scenes. But now even that protection was gone, and Emily was left with the haunting knowledge that her sister had been a victim of something far darker than she could have imagined. The months that followed were filled with grief and healing, but also a sense of deep frustration. Emily had spent years searching for answers, and when the truth finally came to light, it had been more twisted and complicated than she could have ever predicted. There were no easy resolutions, no simple closure. There was only the harsh reality that her sister was gone, and the man who had kept the truth from her was now behind bars. Timothy, too, struggled with the fallout. The wedding that was supposed to mark the beginning of a beautiful life had become a symbol of loss and betrayal. The dreams they had shared, the plans they had made, everything, had been stolen from them, taken away by someone they had trusted. The pain of it all was suffocating, but Timothy found solace in one thing: Emily. Despite everything, they had both survived the ordeal, and in the end, that was all they had left. Emily spent the next few months slowly rebuilding her life, trying to reclaim the sense of normalcy that had been stolen from her. She returned to her work, reaching out to friends and family who had supported her throughout the years. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something more important: the truth. And while it had been painful to uncover, it had also given her a sense of closure that she hadn't had before. But even with the case closed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she had missed, something she hadn't fully understood. David had claimed that there were things she would never know, things she couldn't undo. What had he meant by that? Was there more to this story than she could see? As she walked through the quiet streets of the town where it all began, Emily was reminded of the girl she used to be, girl who had believed in the simplicity of love, in the certainty of happiness. The girl who had never imagined that her world could be turned upside down. The girl who had believed in good versus evil, in right versus wrong, but the truth she had learned was much more complicated. It was messy, it was painful, and it didn't always follow the rules. The thought lingered in her mind as she stood at the edge of the lake, staring out at the water, the same water that had once held the promise of a new beginning for her and Timothy. The same water that had claimed her sister's dreams. And as the wind blew gently across the surface of the lake, Emily couldn't help but wonder, was it truly over? Had David been the only one pulling the strings, or was there something else, something deeper, that still remained hidden? With a deep breath, Emily turned and walked away, knowing that she would never stop searching for the truth, because, in the end, that was all that mattered. A lingering echo. It had been months since David Winters was arrested, and life, in some form, had returned to normal for Emily and Timothy. The investigation was closed, the police had tied up loose ends, and David was now facing charges for his numerous crimes, including his manipulation and involvement in Laura's disappearance. Justice, as they say, had been served, but the scars that remained, both physical and emotional, were far from healed. For Emily, the sense of relief she had once felt when David was taken into custody was now tainted by something darker, something unsettling. There were still nights when she woke up, drenched in sweat, the image of David's cold eyes staring back at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that his arrest wasn't the final piece of the puzzle. David had been dangerous, but his part in the story felt too contained, too easy. Timothy had tried to move forward as best he could, though the wounds he carried ran deep. His fiancée was gone, and though he had fought through years of pain, betrayal, and unanswered questions, there was still something haunting him. A void where Laura used to be. A life that was meant to be but was cruelly taken away by someone he had trusted. But there was a particular detail that kept Emily up at night, a nagging thought that refused to fade, one last fragment of the case that refused to let her rest. The last time she spoke to David, right before he was arrested, he had said something that stuck with her. His words were vague, but they had been laced with an unmistakable sense of finality. There are things you'll never know, things you can't undo. End quote. Emily had brushed it off at the time, thinking it was the rantings of a man who had lost control of his own lies. But now, in the silence of her apartment, those words echoed in her mind like a distant drumbeat, growing louder and louder the more she thought about it. The idea that there was more to the story, that there was something she had missed, something still buried beneath the surface gnawed at her. Could there be another piece to this puzzle? A detail, an individual, or a truth that had somehow slipped through their grasp? Determined to put her mind at ease, Emily decided to visit the place where it all began, the estate where Laura had vanished, where everything had been shattered. She had avoided it for months, unable to face the place where her sister's life had been stolen. But now she needed closure. She needed to understand. The estate was quiet, overgrown with weeds, a ghost of the vibrant place it had once been. The windows were boarded up, and the yard was untended, as though time itself had stopped there, refusing to let go of the tragedy that had unfolded within those walls. As Emily walked through the grounds, memories of the wedding day, memories that once filled her with hope now, felt like a lifetime ago. The joy that had been present here had long since been replaced by something darker. It was then that she noticed something. A small weathered box was buried beneath the ivy near the front steps, half hidden from view. She had never seen it before, certainly not when she had visited the estate during the early days of the investigation. It looked out of place, as though it had been deliberately buried, deliberately concealed. Her heart skipped a beat as she knelt down and carefully pulled the box from the earth. It was small and simple, made of wood with a rusty lock securing it shut. Emily's hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the surface, feeling the familiar weight of dread settle in. She knew, in that moment, that this was no accident. This box had been hidden, and whatever was inside, it was waiting for her to uncover. With a steady hand, Emily pried open the lock, the rust crumbling away as the lid creaked open. Inside, there were several items, a stack of photographs, some papers, and a small, familiar object. It was a locket, one that Laura had worn on the day of the wedding. But it wasn't just any locket. This one contained a photograph of Laura and Mark Thompson, man who had been in the photos they'd found months ago, the man who had been a part of their investigation. But what struck Emily the most wasn't the photograph. It was the letter, yellowed with age, folded carefully beneath the locket. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter and began to read. "I know what you're doing. You think you can stop me, but you're wrong. There's no escaping this. You've always been in the way, Emily, always standing between me and what I want. But now, there's no one to protect you, no one to stop me. You think you've uncovered the truth, but the truth is far darker than you could ever imagine. I'll make sure of it." The handwriting was unmistakable. It was David's. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the reality of what she was reading began to sink in. This wasn't over. David's arrest, the closure, the sense of finality, it had all been an illusion. The letter was proof that David had known about the box, about the things he had kept hidden, and that the truth he had revealed was only a fraction of what had truly happened. The threat in the letter was clear. He wasn't finished. And neither was the mystery. Emily felt the cold weight of the locket in her palm as she stood up, her mind spinning. The discovery of the letter, the photographs, and the warning from David had uncovered a truth that had been buried far deeper than she had anticipated. She wasn't just trying to find her sister anymore. She was trying to survive the aftermath of a nightmare that refused to end. As the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around her, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. Someone was still out there, still pulling the strings. And no matter how many answers she uncovered, the haunting truth was that some mysteries were never truly meant to be solved. The past, it seemed, was still alive, and Emily was still caught in its web.